Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, an educational and human interest show for those of us who are impacted by prenatal exposure to alcohol and our loved ones, and for anyone else interested in learning more about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. I'm Patti Kasper, your host and your FASD coach. And today we are going to have another of our series of interviews with adults living with FASD. And so I am joined by Josh Bechtel, who is an adoptee, who is a poet, an author, an artist, an editor, and wordsmith, and much more. Josh, thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to hear your story and and so that any parents out there listening can draw encouragement from the success that we've had in our lives, and to see that, yeah, there's struggles, but we get through it. There's light at the end of the tunnel, the other side of whatever it was that tripped us up a little bit. And I just want to remind all the viewers and listeners also that this is a spectrum disorder, which means every single one of us is impacted very uniquely. And some of us are very intelligent, and others are very impacted, making it very difficult to get good grades or whatever. And others of us may have more issues in the adaptive functioning scheme of things. And so everyone is different, and we cannot look at those of us who appear successful and minimize the impact of prenatal exposure to alcohol. Just the same way we cannot, automatically assume gloom and doom, because we're all over the map. So again, Josh, welcome to Living with FASD.
Well, thank you for the invite and for letting me come on. This is going to be fun.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, where did FASD come to light for you? When did you suspect maybe that's something that I struggle with?
Um, that's an interesting question. Part of the answer is I knew that my biological parents were alcoholics and all those things. I was born in the 70s, and so I actually found out when I was 19, because my adoptive parents found out about Diane Malvin, because we lived
Hmm.
in near Portland, Oregon. I lived in a little town of Estacade, Oregon, about 40 minutes from Portland, and that's
Okay.
where Diane was. Maybe she
Yeah.
still lives there. So there's a long story of the family, one of the families in our church had Diane come out to our church for a information meeting to help um, give it an information meeting about another family. I always say
Hmm.
for another family, and my adopted parents were there in this meeting. And I'm saying this carefully, according to the story that I was told, that meeting is where my adoptive mom claims that she found it clicked that I might have
Yeah.
FASD. Now, asterisks, recent later events, later talk, communicating with other people convinces me that that was almost a lie. I was
Mm.
lied to, that I was almost lied to my face, that my parents didn't know. I mean, it is complicated. I don't want to go into a bunch of bad mouthing, but the fact is, I found out about it at the age of 19,
Okay.
and when I found out about it, it was like the first time in my life that I knew why I am the way I am, like why my
Yeah.
eyes are the way they
Yeah.
are, why my distance judging is the way it is, why my mental processes are the way they are, the way why
Hmm.
certain light gives me problems. And to this day, I still don't. I do not drive because a whole bunch of neurological brain
Yeah.
stuff. And
Well,
I took the test 3 times and
mhm.
failed all three times. And
I will say that driving's not a good idea if you don't have good depth perception.
I do not have good depth perception. I
Yeah.
grew up growing up. I had eggs. You know the. I don't know. I guess the audience. I'm assuming the audience knows what somebody had getting eggs on their forehead means when you bang into a door jam. You get a big welt in
Oh,
your.
yes.
I grew up literally walking into the door
Yeah.
jam. I was like,
Yeah.
where'd that thing come from?
Yeah.
So
One of the kiddos on my caseload, um, y- foster mom calls him a human pinball. But I mean, it's as if he has no brakes. It's the walls and door jams and objects that stop him, from running full speed ahead. Uh,
that's the
so
short. That's a short answer to your question. Is
yeah.
basically I accidentally found out about. But that sounds weird, but I hope that makes sense. It's
What?
like,
So
go ahead.
were you 19 when your parents listened to Diane Malbin?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But you weren't at that meeting, just your parents were, and your mom said, I think I
After the
finally
meeting,
understand. So,
not exactly.
okay.
They, and I'm not even sure how to say this. They said, "Here's a book." It was the
Trying differently rather
trying
than,
different, harder. The 2 books.
yes,
They said, "Here,
yes.
look this through." So I looked through both of them, and I was like, the things she laid out, I was like, man, that's me. That's it's like a
Mhm.
road map. It's like a map. That's like this is.
Yeah, yeah,
And then she said, this isn't an excuse. This isn't a reason." And I'm like, real talk.
mhm,
Why did you tell me about this? I was
mhm,
19. I'm 40. I'm 46 now. I was 19. I was like,
yeah,
why did you give me my process? Why did you give me this? And years later, after years later, um, my mom actually wrote me, said, "Yeah, we didn't understand your basically my processing, my memoir, which they didn't really like, but they came around to the idea that I wrote it, and some of my podcasts that I've been a guest on. They're like, okay, we didn't know." I'm like,
yeah, yeah.
okay,
So coming to terms with FASD, how it comes to be, right? Because most women, it's drinking before you realize you're pregnant,
okay,
or things like that. But I mean, for most of us, it really is a journey. It's a process that we're on. Um, Diane Malbin is part of my story too. Not that I ever interacted with her or my parents, but I went to study at the organization she founded,
okay,
Facets, right? In order to better help the families of all the kiddos on my caseload. And it was in that same, she developed an exploration tool which has a list of all the characteristics of
mm-hmm,
FASD,
mm-hmm,
some of which are primary, meaning these behaviors describe the actual changes in our brain, right? They
mm-hmm,
reflect the brain damage,
mm-hmm.
versus these over here reflect nobody understanding us and how we end up, defending ourselves against further pain because no one
Oh yeah,
understands us.
oh yeah,
And I found myself as I'm learning about all these things in order to train parents about all this, I'm like, I do that. I do that. I do that too. And and then, talking with my mom, did you drink when you carried me? Oh yeah, every day. Because it was the 60s and that's what you did back then. So, but it's a process. I learned a whole lot up front because I was studying it,
Hmm.
but the revelations, they really trickle in
Oh
as
yeah.
as you're ready to process. Then you'll get more and more
Oh yeah.
revelations about how it has played out in your life over time. Because there's no way we could handle processing 100% of the
Oh
implications
yeah.
all at one time. It would be way too overwhelming.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we'd have some kind of psychotic breakdown. You
And we do anyway. That's for
So,
free.
okay. So you knew when you were 19 and you were like, well, if it's, why did you tell me? And then say none of it is an excuse. That to me sounds like your parents had that initial aha, but the part of them willing to change paradigms from looking at behavior as intentional, right? Where FASD would be an excuse. That hadn't arrived yet,
That
right?
seems to be an accurate
Yeah,
statement.
yeah. It's part of that, progression of accepting
Me,
reality.
I
Yeah.
was lucky. Just to give you one thing that just now comes to mind. When I read in the literature that somebody can do 3 or 4 different tasks in a
Mhm.
row, and the first one they could do it perfectly. The second time, not so much. Third time, it's a bomb out. Fourth time, it's and time 5, it's like that was like the biggest light bulb. It was like that's historically the way I am because I can do one thing perfectly. It's like, Josh,
Mhm.
that proves you can do it all the time. Does not because if I and I
Right?
got that all over the place,
Yeah.
and of course, and I've also had people tell me that, well, Josh, you've succeeded at this. Yeah, I have at this. Yeah,
Mhm.
that means you can succeed
Mhm.
at that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I tried my
Yeah.
hardest, and
Yeah.
I'm flopping as if
Yeah.
I say, your biggest failure has more energy than
Mhm.
your easiest success. I mean, that sounded profound. I don't know if it made. I don't know if it said anything, but it felt profound as I said it. But it's true. So
I think, and I totally forgot what I was going to say. Doggone it. It'll come back. It'll come back. Oh, I know what it was. Um, so there's all these different systems that we interact with, right? There's the educational system, there's
mhm.
social services, and most states have a system for developmental disabilities. And there's usually the way they weed people out, because they're tremendously underfunded always. One of the ways they keep people off the books is by looking at IQ scores. And so there's this magic number, and usually it's 74, 75, somewhere in there, where if you score that or above, then you have the intellect to be able to navigate life. Therefore, you don't need services.
Yeah.
But that what they're not looking at is the difference between intellectual and adaptive functioning, right? Because there's also that phrase of being book smart and life dumb.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Um, where intelligence can be at least for me, my intelligence was a protective factor. It enabled me to get around some of my executive functioning struggles, but it only goes so far. There's a lot of challenges that we can have with our executive functioning, right? This part of the brain that intelligence just doesn't matter. No. You know, it's kind of like, smart people who can ace any test but can't find their way out of a paper sack. You know, but
Yeah.
um, it is there's adaptive functioning that can be even more crippling than the intellectual functioning.
What I'm hearing you say, and I've experienced this as a kid, I can read, understand everything on a page,
Mhm.
get it. I'm like, yeah, I get it. Close the book, and it's like,
What did I
I
just read?
don't know what
Yeah,
that was.
yeah.
And then somebody says, oh, you didn't even, the thing that burned me or that burned me isn't quite, yeah, it's the right word. It basically ground into me that, Josh, that means you're not trying. It's like,
Yeah. Ugh,
my,
yes.
my math brain, math is my weakest part of,
It is for many of us.
and of course, I was adopted into a math family.
Okay.
I was born into, not born, I was adopted into extrovert talk. I
Hmm.
was the bookworm. I was the quiet one. I was the
Yeah,
non-math one. I
yeah.
and so I remember feeling my brain literally overheat trying
Mm.
to do the math, the flashcards.
Yes.
And I was told, just this is addressing some of the, this is basically how I've dealt with stuff.
Mm.
I still do this when I count. It's like, and it's
Okay.
like I still,
If it helps, go for it.
and I basically, oops, well, hope hope nobody's watching. It's like,
Sorry.
and I've been, so, but then I was basically very nearly shamed for how much of a bookworm I is, but and how so there's a weird dynamic there of like I'm the weakest in math and strongest in the reading, and I was plopped into a family that was the opposite of that. So it's sort of, um, I started fairly young, feeling like I was quite not understood and not didn't fit in at all, although I rather tried to. And so, um, yeah, the reading is. I admit reading was my escape. Like I
Mhm.
joke that we didn't have TV. We were a conservative Mennonite family, so we didn't have TVs, and but we did have the encyclopedia, all 20 something volumes, the encyclopedia,
Yeah.
and we had the childcraft, all 15. This was a 1968
Mhm.
set, and so that was my entertainment, was those
We
books.
had
And so
two different sets of encyclopedias.
I was like, I remember just devouring everything I could get a hold of reading wise, and it was an escape. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, and it was also got me into some trouble. So it was sort of, and again, I was an adopted foster
Mhm.
kids, so all that stuff. And speaking in my parents' defense, they did not know about FASD.
Yeah.
We knew that my mom and dad were alcoholics.
Mhm.
No, they were alcohol. That was a beautiful tongue slip of the tongue. They were alcoholics, and they were not married. My
Yeah.
biological family. So, and that's basically all they knew. That's all my adopted parents knew. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, back then, they had no idea about
mhm,
the damage that alcohol caused.
right.
I mean, FASD has been with us as long as alcohol has,
Oh, yeah.
thousands of years, but we just didn't realize.
Yeah, that's
So,
true.
yeah. Yeah, there again, we can't blame the parents for doing things that they didn't know were harmful, especially if they did them before they knew they were pregnant. Um, the blame, the fault lies with the substance.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So your
So
parents knew, your adoptive parents knew that you had struggles and challenges, and they did the best they could, even though they didn't understand it, right?
we can say that. Yeah, there were some in some ways that they did,
Mm-hmm.
some ways that they didn't,
Mm-hmm.
and they would admit that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my adopted dad passed away about 14 years ago, and my adoptive mom still lives, and so she's in her 80s. So, um, but yeah, that I don't. If they would have known everything,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they would have taken me in as a foster or adopted kid.
Mm.
They might not have.
How do you feel
Um,
about that?
uh, that's a mixed bag of a question because
Mhm.
I
You don't have to answer. I
no
mean,
no no
because
I
this is going
process
out
it.
to the world,
I
right?
I
So,
process it. I've written 2 books, 3 books about it. So
okay.
I'm about as non hide about it as it's possible to be. So I'm like, there's a saying by I think it's in one of Sandra Wilson's books. Have you released? I think the book's Released from Shame.
I haven't read that one.
It's there's a I think it's her book. There's a saying, half a loaf is better than none.
Okay.
And that is sort of my mantra because I say that I got half a loaf, and half a loaf is better than none.
Yeah.
Even if the half of the loaf that I got has a few stones in it, I did get half a loaf. And
Yeah.
by the way, in case anybody's wondering, and this I get this all the time, I'll just put this out there. My adoptive family, my adoptive mom has read my memoir, my book
Okay.
on adoption, my poetry book. She's read and seen, as far as I can tell at the moment, all of my art, all of my
Mhm.
writing. She's seen and heard it. So
Mm.
I say this because there's some people that whenever they see something like this, they run to tattle on this troublemaker's
Oh, yeah.
this parents. I'm
Yeah.
saying, go ahead. She already knows.
So,
So moving on.
there again, we all have, many of us have a lot of common experiences, but they're also all very unique. We are, as unique as our fingerprints in terms of the circumstance that we come from, the strengths and the challenges that we have as we, interact with the people in our worlds.
Mm-hmm,
And we have to give not only ourselves some grace, but also our parents, because I'd like to believe the best in everybody. And those of us with FASD, we tend to want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt all the time.
mm-hmm.
Um, they would not have adopted you if they had not believed for good things for you.
Yeah,
Um,
I can see, yeah.
right. So, and
Mm-hmm,
the fact that, um, you did have a lot of challenges that they didn't fully understand because nobody understood back then,
mm-hmm.
but she's enough of your fan that she reads everything you put out there. Right. So there are good things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I, so many times because the audience is varied,
Oh,
so
yeah.
primarily this is a place where people who are living with FASD can find encouragement and similarity and community. But it's also a place of education and insight
Mhm.
for parents who are raising littles with FASD. And sometimes someone can say something that seems harsh toward adoptive parents or toward birth parents. And it's not necessarily that parents deserve to be bashed, whether they're adoptive or birth, but it's just that one person's experience. And and that one person is entitled to that
Oh,
opinion
yeah.
about what they went through because it's their story. But on the whole, I at least recognize that nobody knew what they didn't know until they
Of
learned it.
course.
And we're all on that journey together
Mhm.
because we're always still learning
Oh, yeah.
day by day. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad you have a half a loaf.
Yeah, so
So
am I.
so what has your journey been like, as you wrap your head around this is what FASD looks like in me? So it explains your spatial relation difficulties. It explains your math struggles.
It explains, well, for me, it explains why I'm on several levels not able to drive, and that
Okay.
was growing up. That's the one that presents first. That's everybody finds out whether I tell them or whether they say, "Hey, here's the keys." I'm like, "Hey, I usually have an embarrassing 15, 20 minutes of, hey, I don't. You don't? Why? You look smart enough. Then I have to go through and have it's
Yeah.
this and this. And quite often, uh, it's like, well, trans, to translate the response I usually get, it's, well, you said that so intelligently sounding that there can't
Hmm.
be nothing wrong with you. I'm like, did you not hear a thing I said? So
Yeah.
I list off the distance judging, the eyes, the focusing, the all that stuff. They say, oh, and so I list those. Those are the ones that the easier ones to grasp. And then they
So
say, and then they say, so you're saying you're scared to drive? I'm like, my my outward and inward reaction is,
they didn't understand a word of what I just said. Yeah.
yeah,
So try this next time.
okay,
Um, Ask them if they would want to be the passenger in a car on a 2-lane road behind someone super slow if the driver could not accurately judge the speed of the car coming the other direction. Is there time to pass? Is there not time to pass? If you can't judge speed or distance or both, would they want to be the passenger?
that would. I've had conversations that would almost work. And I've also had conversations that I said, I've had people try to, I'm saying this nicely, try to force me to get behind the wheel and drive. And I
Mhm.
said, so I've said this to them. I said, so the only thing that would convince you that I shouldn't drive, that's not, there's a lot of other words you could put into it, is that if I were in a vehicle in a wreck because of dist- distance judging, all the stuff, and I was in a wreck that could have been avoided.
Mhm.
And I said that, and it's one of them, somebody that said, actually admitted that, yeah, uh, I guess that's the only thing that would actually convince me that you
Yeah.
shouldn't is. And so I'm like, well, I've had to, I've personally had to fight for the right to say, hey, I have hidden reasons,
Mhm.
hidden disabilities for not being able to drive, that you can't have hidden
Yeah.
disabilities, period.
Yeah.
Like I know I've seen a picture of your brain, the human, the good human brain is like this, and
Mhm.
I have enough life experience, and my brain is probably like this. The human brain's like this,
Yeah.
and my brain
Yeah.
sometimes feels like that, and it's like
Yeah.
because my brain, I can feel my brain heat up on the most, basically under stress, under a lot of stress from
Mhm.
a lot of different directions. I can feel my head just basically throb
Yeah. Yeah.
like there's a fire inside there, and then of course it doesn't show on the on my face. It Here's a free fact: it does not, most of the time, doesn't even show on my
Mhm.
face,
Mhm.
and so that's kind of a tell. And I think on the podcast, on the Facebook page, somebody was mentioned that it, about, there's some posts about the masking, or about
Mhm.
you can't, nobody can see it, whatever the fine word, the real word is. Basically, nobody can see what's actually going on, and
Yeah.
the emotions, the feelings sometimes don't register.
Yeah.
Like, I can be
Yeah.
enjoying something, whatever it is, and look on my face, from what I've been told, is basically,
Pretty neutral.
"Josh, are you bored?" I'm like, "Uh, what?" I look how? I love
Yeah.
this. What's going on today? Well, you look like you're
Yeah.
sorry.
But that's not uncommon, right?
Right.
Um, and there again, it's something where we can be all over the map, right? Very individual, because um, I am not one who could ever play poker. Is you could see it. But there are other things where other times when people have said that they thought I didn't care about something. And when they confronted me on something, instantly I'm in tears because I feel it very deeply. Um, it really bothers me when people
Mhm.
are disappointed or hurt or whatever. But it doesn't always register in the facial
Yeah,
language, right? And that's not unusual. Yeah.
that's not, and it's
Yeah.
taken, in case somebody wonders, it's taken probably a decade or so to get some of that stuff to um, register. It's like
Hmm.
that actually, it's like that's actually happening. And
Hmm.
again, this is part of, it's not all of why, but it
Yeah.
is part of it. So it's like it's taken years to, oh wow, it's like,
Yeah.
and so I know that I've read that FASD, there's a, what's, I can't think of the right word.
Word finding's
It
another
may,
struggle.
I'm sorry.
I said word finding is another struggle that we have.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. Not being able to think. And I'm filling in the air until I can think of the right word. Let's see, which I can't. So let's just move on because it's gone.
It'll come to you as soon as I hit stop on the recording.
So there, ladies and gentlemen, is your object lesson of what we're talking about. So moving
Yeah.
on, because it was one of those squirrels that we
Yeah. Squirrel.
apparently wasn't necessary. So anyway, yeah.
So, I had the similar experience as you did, Josh, in terms of um, when, looking back at my life. I was a lot older than you were when I found out I was 56. Um, but prior to knowing that fetal alcohol exposure was part of me, I had explanations for the whys in my life. Why was I socially awkward? Why was I the kid that the team captains fought over who would get stuck with me? Why, why was I bullied? Why this, why that, why the
Mhm.
other? And, my parents, of course, were clueless because it was the 60s and 70s. I was class of 1980 for high school. Um, and nobody knew. And
Mhm.
so I'd find as good an explanation as I could. It was, well, because my parents were divorced, or, well, because, my stepfather made life a living hell. Well, because I was the only diabetic in my school. And none of them really explain things.
Mhm.
But the FASD, yeah, that explains it rather well.
Yeah.
But, again, like I said earlier, we get bits and pieces, and we can process things, over the course of time. So life makes sense to you now, the way that it never had before,
Yeah.
the more you've learned about it. Yeah.
Life, rephrase. Since I'm going to go into editor mode.
Okay.
um, I'm able to navigate life in its wonkiness because I know about FASD.
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm like I like in my mind. It's not how I would. I'm not sure how I would explain it to somebody who's. I'm not sure how to explain it at all, just off the top of my head, but I'll try. It's like um, I I have an explanation. I have the explanation is in my subconscious, at least. It's like
Okay.
I know. It's like, Josh, what are you like? Why are you like this? It's because you have a Josh, because you have a condition
Hmm.
that you didn't ask for,
Hmm. Yeah.
but it's a thing. And before it was a thing, it was, Josh, it's your fault. You're trying.
Yeah.
It's like, I know that there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Josh,
Because
here's the, and that means that it's a thing that you can, okay, the reason I can process, if I know the why, I can say, oh, so that's why
so
sometimes when I'm exhausted, I say,
you're
um,
able to give yourself grace now
for
because you
instance,
understand that it's not your fault, right? Whereas
yeah,
before, all the time growing up, we're blamed and we're shamed for our differentness, and we're punished a lot of times for not being able to meet people's expectations, for not being able to be like everybody else, all the things that we should be able to do, right? um, and we cannot help but internalize all those messages and begin blaming ourselves and wondering what's wrong with me, right?
yeah, here's a great example. I should be able to have a complete thought and express it without a lot of space as well. It's never been me.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been the kid who's able to say a whole lot of stuff without pausing and without everybody finishing my sentences. I've always been the guy who everybody that I know finishes Josh's sentences, and it's like, and I'm like, I feel myself sometimes, my mind racing to try to catch up, and then
Mhm.
I get exhausted. And of course, there are days. This is for the audience behind you, so to speak. They're like, there are some days that I were that if I tried to have a conversation like this, it would not go good at all. My self expression would not be good. I'd give this level of being able to express myself somewhere between a 60 and 70%
Okay.
for me.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm way less able to express myself. Some
Mhm.
days my brain and my mouth are they're trying to catch up, and they race and
It
so
seems as though your mouth is struggling to keep up with your mind.
it is.
Yeah.
I admit, yeah, I'm going to admit that. Yeah, right now it's
Yeah.
this is
Is there anything we can do to help bring those closer into alignment for you?
what I'm not sure if you can do anything, but what I've discovered, this is what a friend of mine calls growing in the moment. Is this when I do this? There's two things that I do when I find myself doing that kind of this like this,
Mhm.
which the experts can probably say why this um, forms the completes the the connection between your brain, that this
Helps the right
doing
and
this,
left
yeah,
communicate? Yeah.
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 Somebody told me this a long time ago, so I'm like, this is sometimes my only save
Mhm.
right here. And something that I learned from working at a children's home, working with autism back, was like a breathing into a brown paper bag,
Mhm.
doing the just take very deep breaths
Mhm.
and blowing them all out. Just that's some of the two things that
Mhm.
help me out. So I kind of talked us through as I did it. So that's kind of cool.
Okay.
That was actually
And
kind of cool.
and you seem to be doing a little better.
We talked it through,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
I even noticed that, which is kind of
Yeah.
interesting to self observe. So,
Yeah. And that's what we have to do, when we have a quote unquote disability, right? We have to learn those workarounds, for whatever our struggles are. So you've got two things that you do, to bring back into alignment the two speeds of your mind and your mouth.
mm,
you know,
yeah.
because we often do have processing speed challenges.
Oh yeah.
And that's
Oh
very
yeah.
common. Yeah. Yeah. So I face that a lot with my mom. She's got dementia, and so stuttering is a big part of that. And yeah, so I use breathing with her.
I don't even try to hide that I stutter. I did more when I was younger than I do now, but sometimes
Mhm.
under stress, whatever, I'm like, oh, too bad I stutter. It's like,
Yeah, could be worse.
could be worse.
Could be worse. So tell me about your artwork.
Oh, what do you want to know about my artwork?
So has that been a therapeutic thing that you do to I guess help you process a lot of the feelings? You said that your feelings, you have big emotions, but they don't come across on your face. Do you express them in your artwork?
Yeah, and it's ironic. It's interesting that art is happened kind of accidentally,
Hmm.
but expressing the emotions, yeah. And sometimes I really this sounds strange. Maybe it doesn't, but that sometimes I don't know what's going to be on the painting till the last, and so sometimes I literally I'm trying to figure out on the canvas
Mhm.
what's actually going on
Yeah.
in the weirdest
Yeah.
in the weirdest way possible, because some of my art is pretty weird, and I am the artist, and I'll admit that it's like I don't know what does this mean? I don't know.
Mhm.
What does it? You painted it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the art is basically, yeah, self-expression.
Yeah. A very
Yeah.
wise woman named Antonia Lindsay, just a phenomenal woman. She was one of the FASD pioneers, along with Strijsguth and um, Melbourne, and people of that era. She was of the same era when she was doing a lot of her research, but she's an art therapist. I'll be having her on hopefully before too long
Oh,
to
cool.
talk about this, but
Oh, that'd be
you,
cool.
she talks about how art isn't about the object that that we're drawing or painting or whatever the medium is, but it's a way of being, right?
Oh, yeah.
um and there are things that will be expressed through art that we can never express verbally.
Oh, yeah.
So, and it might, because so many of us have the processing challenges and the inability to process abstract concepts, or because we're very concrete, talk therapy is not always effective for us. And so art therapy, hopefully we can see more people use that. So
My
yeah.
biggest strength is actually words. Writing is kind of bringing it back to FASD. In a weird sort of way, my writing, I can thank FASD for making some, and it's in the literature. It's like spelled out there, and Diane's
Mm-hmm.
trying differently, not harder. It's like writing is sometimes how it compensates. Like,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
It's my saving
Yeah.
grace, knowing that people are like, I don't even know if I should. I don't even know if I should bring this up. I guess I will, just to give a counterpoint to, because there's probably some people who've traversed in and out of churches that don't really know what they're talking about when they talk about
Mm.
you need to get healed. I'll just say this:
Mm.
I've had people tell me, Josh, don't you shouldn't you why don't you ask to be healed of this FASD thing? You know, the some of the,
Yeah.
I've been in those kind of churches, and I'm like, in the back of my mind, it's like, um,
Yeah, that's not real
if
healthy.
if if then, like, if I, so I'm like, and of
Yeah.
course it goes, it verges on, I'll call it out. It's basically spiritual abuse doing that.
Yes, it is. It
And
is.
I've experienced it, so I know it spiritual abuse. And I'm like, and I won't
Yeah.
try. I'll try not to do it. It's like, um,
I have faced that too with my diabetes. If I had enough faith, my diabetes would go away. Well, my pancreas is still broken. And you know what? That's
well,
okay, because God uses me in the condition that I am. And, he's, and yeah, I will agree
yes,
with you. It's
uh,
abusive to tell someone, you don't have enough faith if blah, 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 because who are they to judge God's timing of deliverance? Some things he will deliver us from in the here and now. Some things he will not deliver us from until we get to the other side. And we have to
Mhm.
be okay, no matter, I mean, because it's his plan, right? And for those of you in the audience who are listening or watching and not people of faith, then thank you for the
That's
grace you're
okay.
going to give us for the last few minutes of discussion. But it is a very real part of life that everyone experiences to one extent or another. And these are challenges that many of us face. So it is what it is. Thank you for having the courage to bring that up, because I can guarantee you there's a lot of people in the audience who have gotten that pushback from people and felt shame instead of love.
And thank you for
So,
letting us have that little spiritual moment. So moving on.
yeah, squirrel. All right. So, are you doing anything, Josh, for the FASD community in the way that you try and educate people or advocate?
um, on one hand, not really.
Okay.
I mean, as far as am I out there? Am I in conventional terms? No,
Okay.
but every time I have an art studio, and every time I have my books available, and when people ask me if every other weekend almost somebody comes in and FASD, adoption, foster care comes
Mm-hmm.
up with organically. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
so that's why, as weird as possible, no, but yes.
I
Because
would
my,
say yes.
as far as, okay, so define what you do.
Hmm.
Uh,
I think you just
I
did
just exist.
beautifully.
I just
Yeah,
exist.
yeah.
I
And
just,
and by having your books there at the studio, that organically drives those questions and gives and provides the opportunity for you to educate and advocate. So well done.
oh, thank you. In case you don't know by now, I'm kind of unconventional. Anyway, so I, I, I have a hard time labeling what I actually do. It's like,
Yeah.
I've had a couple of podcasts. I'm doing this.
Hmm.
I sort of kind of let people find me,
Okay.
and I'm also on one of what's her name, Debbie Raymond's
Hmm.
groups, and
Yeah.
I found out I found that very helpful. And
Yeah.
as a plug, when I was invited on my first, I'm pretty certain Debbie will hear me if she listens to this. And I already told her this, but the first time I attended one of those things, I did not want to attend. I'm like, the evening of the first meeting, I was like, no. And I was like, well, the duty bound part of my brain said, well, Josh, you said you would. Okay. And then I dived in, and I haven't regretted it. I haven't regretted a
Good.
single
Good.
monthly thing. So that's a plug for
Yeah.
somebody who's listening, that do it anyway.
Yeah. We need our peeps, right? Um, yeah, I have formed some of the nearest and dearest friendships of my whole life amongst those of us who are living with FASD, just from the conversations, had either for my book, Sip by Sip, or for this podcast. We're just a bunch of really swell people, very passionate about our beliefs and wanting to make the world a better place. Um, Yeah, we're an incredible bunch of people. So, and those groups are important. You
Yeah,
know,
they
I,
are.
it kind of like listening to, I know you listened to Natalie's podcast when it was up and running, as
Oh,
did
yeah.
I faithfully. But Robbie Seal's FASD Family Life, have you listened to that one?
No, I'll have to go
She's
look it up.
Hers is quite good also. And it was probably a year and a half ago, she had an episode up that was three of the members of the ALC, CJ
Oh,
Lutke,
really?
Emily Hargrove, and Miles Hemrick. And the three of them were talking about the study or the survey that the ALC did of the comorbid conditions.
ALC
And
is
the adult leadership collaboration of the FASD change makers.
okay.
And so they were at, the big conference coming up in Seattle, right? The ninth conference. They were at one of those conferences, and a whole table of adults living with FASD was having dinner together, and some medical procedure came up in the conversation. Oh, I'm having this done next week. Oh, I had that done. And it became this discovery of how many physical conditions people have in common that, way more prevalent than the general population. And just listening to them talk about the power of being together, right? And it's
Mhm.
just like to be surrounded by people who get it.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
invigorating. And that's one thing that that's the kind of comment that I get a lot when I have other adults living with FASD on the show, is people really resonating with our experiences. Um, so yeah, we need our peeps. And there are a number of support groups out there. There is the one that Debbie is one of the facilitators of. There's also Miranda. She's got one that meets on every weekend. But there are several out there. And I was amazed when I was doing research for my book. The glossary has a list of resources. And when at the time, so about a year ago, I looked up FASD in the group search on Facebook, and there
Oh,
were
yeah.
like 90 groups. I was blown away by that.
Hmm.
Who knew? But the one that I met you through, Flying with Broken Wings, is exceptional. It really is a great group. So
Yeah, it is.
yeah. And we've been talking for an hour already. And it seems like it's just whizzed by, but I think
Mhm.
we can always circle back and have more
Oh, yeah.
conversations another time.
Oh,
But
I'd love to.
I'm so glad that you joined me on Living with FASD today. Um, Everybody, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for giving your ear um, to this episode. And I hope that you will come back next Monday for another episode of Living with FASD. In the meantime, if you want to suggest topics or ask questions or suggest people that you think I should have on the air with me, go ahead and write me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. And if you look in the show notes, I'm going to put links to Josh's 3 books. So you will be able to order those. And possibly, Josh, is your studio, is there a page for your studio?
It is actually on Facebook,
Okay.
White Rabbit Galleries. It's in Barberton, Ohio. There is a page to the
Okay.
galleries, but I'll give you
Give me that
Facebook
link.
and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll make sure you have the links. So yeah,
Okay. Perfect.
I
Um,
appreciate, and so does the gallery will appreciate it too. The
sure.
shout out.
Absolutely. All right. So tune in next week. Please remember to like and share the podcast or my channel. so that people, can learn about it. The more people we get watching and listening, the more people who are going to learn about what FASD is. So thanks again, and tune in next Monday for another episode of Living with FASD. Until next time, bye-bye.